Speaking of things to talk about, I'm very excited about this. We're going to talk to Dr. Alasdair Rae. He is at the University of Sheffield in South Yorkshire, England, and he takes big data and makes pretty pictures out of it. Dr. Rae, thanks for joining us today on the new Screensavers.
Thanks for having me, Leo.
So how did you get the idea to do this? Are you a data scientist? Are you a map maker? What is your background?
I work in a urban studies and planning department. I suppose you could call me a planner or geographer, but I like making maps and exploring interesting data sets. And I often use data from the US because it's available and it's interesting.
Yeah.
And there's so many different things you can do with it.
You know, I think I've always loved maps. I mean, going back to paper maps, there's something about maps. You could see the history of the world in the maps they made from different eras. It's always been a really interesting kind of visual display of data. That's really what a map is, if you think about it. But with the advent of smartphones and Google Maps, we've all, and satellite pictures, we've all become kind of fond. I think everybody's gotten into maps. Now we add data to maps, and there's so much we can learn. So we're looking at a commute map. First of all, how do you get the data?
Well, that's an interesting story. The data is from the US Census and something called the American Community Survey. And I knew it existed, but nobody had put it all together. So there's about 75,000 census tracts in the United States. And when you take the origins and destinations, that creates a matrix of about 54 billion cells.
Whoa.
But actually, there's only about 4.1 million interactions. So it's not too big. But I'd never seen anyone take this data out of a database or a spreadsheet. So I thought, I had a new computer last summer. It was quite powerful. I thought I'd test it out. I'd done this for the UK, but the UK is a lot smaller. So I thought I'll try the United States, interesting data. And then I thought what I would do is do some examples from the Bay Area, because you've got 9 counties, you've got some hellish commutes, famous for congestion. And I thought it'd be interesting to see this. And there's a famous professor at UC Berkeley, a guy called Robert Cervero, and he's looked at all this. But the whole point of looking at it visually is that it makes it instantly accessible.
Right.
If you already live there, you know what it's like. But if you don't, it kind of highlights the issue.
Yeah, we do live there.
Yeah. In fact, it's worse.
We've been on that red line that you saw there from Sonoma to San Francisco. That's my red. I made that trip several thousand times.
And some of those maps, there are limited bay crossings, right? So some of those maps actually don't depict just how horrific it is. That map actually does that we're looking at now does a little bit better. It's, you know, you can't cross over the bay. You can't float around. Everybody's going around, and
you can't
it's
get any redder than red, I guess.
No.
We need a new kind of red to show.
Some infrared.
Yeah. So what kind? You said you got a new powerful computer. What are we talking about? Are these microcomputers? Are these mini computers?
Oh, well, no, this is just a 8-core, 32 gig of memory Dell Precision. It weighs about 100 kilos, but it's a laptop. But it's still a desktop machine.
Isn't that amazing? Oh, it's just 8-core. It's not that. But you really have a supercomputer on your lap now.
Yeah, I mean, we have at the University of Sheffield, we have a supercomputer called Iceberg, but, you know, my data is not big enough for that, so I have to just stick to the desktop environment. But basically, the other good thing about this is all done in open source software. So it's, you know, easy to replicate. I write up all the results, and anyone who wants to take the data set, I put the data set together, so now anyone can do whatever they like with it.
So you mentioned the census tracts. Do you have access to other kinds of data? Because I'd imagine there are traffic sensors, and there's other data that's showing where the traffic is and where people are coming from.
Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, another guy at Berkeley, David O'Sullivan, he's been looking at this kind of stuff. You can get this kind of data from traffic counts, you can get it actually from tax returns as well. You can get it annually. You can look at all sorts of origins and destinations. You just need to know where to find it. And some of it's really well hidden.
Do apps like Waze or even Google Maps offer anything in terms of data sets that you can consume, or is that all kept private?
As far as I'm aware, you can't get it, but the only stuff I've done was Google. I did some stuff with the Google News Lab looking at search data, but that wasn't it was a completely different domain. That was an origin destination stuff like the commutes data that I've used.
What have you learned anything by looking at this, or are they just pretty pictures?
Well, yeah, it's good fun.
Yeah, I agree with you.
But there is
especially since you don't live here.
Yeah, it's less fun if you're stuck in it. But
Yeah.
I think the key thing is if you take a data set that's got 4 million rows in it, how can you find the strange patterns, the long commutes, the stuff you wouldn't expect if it's just in a spreadsheet or a database? And you can see the stuff you'd expect to see, but the kind of map you'll see on screen there, that just kind of tells you where the cities are, but also shows you where the connections are. One of the interesting things when you do this, and the paper I wrote on this, I pulled out the mega commutes, the kind of stuff that has been written about by people at the Census Bureau, the kind of commutes that you get that are way beyond 50, 60 miles. You get them people going to New York City, those distances, but you also strangely get these weird lines that appear in the map from the east to the west coast of the States, or from from the Pacific Northwest down to places like Phoenix. So you can identify these strange anomalies and then investigate them. So it does give you an extra edge doing it visually.
Yeah. Well, I could see, for instance, that for some reason a lot of people commute from Amarillo to Lubbock, which is a long commute. I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah. And there's weird ones where people commute. They do it. They live, say, somewhere in Virginia during the week, and they seem to return to Arkansas. There's quite a few of those strange ones, and then you look more deeply and you discover it's to do with armed forces, those kind of things.
Right.
I had an old boss who lived in Portland, Oregon, and worked in San Francisco. And that was a heck of a commute.
But now you don't have airline data in here, do you? Or does it matter how they make the commute?
No, it's this is everything. So some people it's car, some people it's in the Northeast it'll be train, some people are flying, but I just mainly restricted it to 100 miles because beyond that there's very few.
Yeah. And you've been posting this. Your Twitter feed is well worth following if people aren't following you on Twitter, because you've been posting these maps fairly regularly now. I imagine that's how Wired Magazine discovered your data.
I think so, yeah. Wired Magazine, I don't think they do it anymore, but they did have a kind of Maps Lab section, and Greg Miller last summer saw one of the ones I did. The kind of flow maps here, that's kind of a hobby of mine in a way. I mean, I've done a couple of academic papers on it. I just like to use interesting data sets. I use these for teaching my students, my master students. But it's also useful when we look at stuff to do with migration, or I've done global mapping of flight paths and all sorts of stuff. But there's a long history of this. I mean, it goes way back to the 1800s, actually.
How are your tools changing? Are there technological advances that are helping you? Are there new data sources and new mapping tools and new charting tools?
Yeah, well, exactly. There's tons of data available now, so the problem isn't getting the data. The problem is trying to figure out what to do with it. The software that I use is an open source geographic information system called QGIS, and that's really changed everything in the last 5 years. It's really nice graphically. It can handle large data sets. And the plugins, so for example, the commutes map in the Bay Area I use a plugin written by a guy called Michael Min, and he's just a developer who does it in his spare time. And that's kind of the spirit of open source. But so I'm just using the tools that these guys have made available. It wouldn't be possible without open source.
And it generates an animated GIF. What are we looking at? Is this SVG? What does it generate?
This is just a GIF.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That's really neat.
Obviously,
I think we're just entering a magical age of big data and data viz. I mean, I think it's just about to explode. You do some political stuff too. I've seen your maps of gerrymandering as we enter this election year. This is the 2nd District, Texas. That's one district, which obviously, when you see it as you have done by itself, you realize how much they carved it up to make it vote one way or the other.
Yeah, that's kind of always used, and I studied urban and regional geography master's degree at Ohio State, and we had a guy come in and talk about the gerrymandering issue, and then President Obama mentioned gerrymandering in his last State of the Union address, so I thought I'd take a look. And North Carolina is always mentioned as being kind of the worst example, but a lot of people don't actually know what these things look like. So I thought, because the software, QGIS software allows you to automate the mapping process. I just set up some templates, colored a red or blue for each party, and just ran off a batch of them and made them available. And then again, Wired picked that up, and they thought it was quite interesting that people could see it. And that generated another set of comments and quite a lot of shares on Facebook as well.
You know what it didn't generate? A fix. We're still doing it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah. You can see it. Doesn't mean you're going to fix it. Alasdair, go ahead.
No, I think if more people are mad about it, maybe something will happen.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
I'm turning into a cynic.
Maybe
here.
data viz can help us there. I mean, I have definitely seen people do data visualization of trying to find algorithms of how you might use data to redistrict instead of instead of politics.
You mean like along geographic lines or something like that?
Imagine
crazy.
that.
What a crazy idea. What are you, nuts? You must be a radical.
Yeah, I'm out there, Leo. I'm out there.
What's your Twitter handle?
Mine?
Yeah.
Sorry, Under the Radar.
Under the Radar, which is
Alasdair Rae was taken.
Yeah, well, no, Under the Radar is better. And if you want to follow Under the Radar on Twitter, you'll get a lot of, thanks to Twitter now embedding images on their webpage and even animated GIFs, you'll get a lot more.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I've got a GIF addiction.
Wonderful stuff. Yeah, GIF addiction. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, you have the GIF addiction. Well, it's perfect for this. So it's interesting that the open source software generates animated GIFs.
Yeah.
How funny is that? Yeah. Oh, you're also a drone fanatic, huh?
Yeah, no, I like that.
Oh, I'll tell you.
It's good stuff.
Oh, yeah. Under the radar, but over our heads at all times. Alasdair Rae. Thank you so much for joining us on the New Screen
Thank you very much for having me.
Great to talk to you.
Pleasure.
And thanks for the great maps. Don't you love maps?
I do.
Is
I
that
love
just
them.
Maps, pens? It's
Nerds.
Is it a nerds thing?
love maps and pens and fiddly design things, and it's all part of. They don't all love all of it, but so many of them love some of it.
We should do, maybe you guys will do it, a GIS podcast, a map cast.
That's interesting.
Just talk about maps. A data visualization podcast.
That would be. We did on my space podcast. We did an interview with a woman named Rachel Binks who does data viz at Jet Propulsion Lab, and her goal is to build better tools for the scientists who are piloting all these spacecraft because the tools aren't very good. But now you can build much better tools than you used to be able to.
We find that at theincomparable.com?
That's on Relay.
Relay.fm.
Relay.fm/liftoff. You can find that one.
Liftoff, a space show. How many podcasts do you do now?
Too many. I don't even want to count.
You do not know the number. People ask me that too, and I go, a lot.
I have 5 weekly, and then there's some that are more than that.
Many.
And, there's too many.
1, 2, 3, many.
You lose count.